The International Diplomatic Law, Diplomatic Privileges and Immunities. The introductions to diplomatic privileges and immunities, the establishment of diplomatic relations and missions, functions of a diplomatic missions, diplomatic staff and appointment, privileges and immunities, termination of functions and transit, obligations of diplomatic agents, legal framework and historical context, the establishment of diplomatic relations, core functions of diplomatic missions, diplomatic immunity framework. The Vienna Conventions on Diplomatic Relations 1961 is a fundamental international treaty that governs the establishments of permanent bilateral diplomatic missions and outlines the privileges and immunities granted to these missions and their staff. Even among the few signatory states, the convention is regarded as an authoritative statement of international law, and it is heavily relied upon by International Court of Justice. Diplomacy involves states conducting relations, and the convention ensures freedom and security for effective performance of diplomatic functions, including representations, protections, negotiations, reporting, and promoting friendly relations. Diplomacy is the means by which a state conduct relations with other states. The conventions facilitates this by providing the necessary freedom and security for diplomatic missions to perform their functions effectively. These functions include representing the sending state, protecting its interests and those of its nationals, negotiating with the receiving state, reporting on developments, and promoting friendly relations. Diplomatic relations and the establishment of permanent diplomatic missions require mutual consent of both the sending and receiving states. Both must be sovereign states and recognize each other as such. Recognition often leads to the establishment of diplomatic relations, and sometimes the act of establishing such relations constitutes recognition itself. The two states involved are referred to as the sending state and the receiving state. Diplomatic missions are generally known as embassies, but some have different titles, such as Libyan People's Bureau. Between Commonwealth countries, diplomatic missions are called high commissions, and the ambassadors are known as high commissioners. Even after diplomatic relations are established, the sending state is not obliged to set up a permanent mission in receiving state. Economic constraints or political considerations may influence these decisions. In some cases, a single mission may be accredited to multiple states, or a state may appoint an ambassador who resides in a neighboring country. According to Article 3 of the Conventions, the functions of a diplomatic missions include representing the sending state in the receiving state, protecting the interests of the sending state and its nationals within the receiving state, negotiating with the government of the receiving state, ascertaining conditions and developments in the receiving state, and reporting back to the sending state, promoting friendly relations, and developing economic, cultural, and scientific ties. Diplomatic missions may also perform consular functions such as issuing passports and visas and assisting nationals in distress. Diplomatic staff are appointed by the sending state, but the receiving state must approve the appointment of the head of mission, known as the agrément. The receiving state may refuse the appointment without providing reasons. Diplomatic staff are classified into three different categories. The first is ambassadors or high commissioners accredited to heads of state, envoys, ministers, and internuncios accredited to the heads of state, chargé d'affaires accredited to ministers for foreign affairs. The sending state may appoint military, naval, and air attaché to the missions, subject to the approval of the receiving state. Privileges and immunities. Inviolability of diplomatic premises. Article 22, Clause 1 provides that the premises of the missions are inviolable. Agents of the receiving state cannot enter without consent. Article 22, Clause 2, the receiving state has a special duty to protect the mission's premises from intrusions or damage. Article 22, Clause 3, the mission's archives and documents are also inviolable. With regards to immunity of diplomatic agents, Article 29 provides that diplomatic agents are inviolable and must not be liable to any form of arrest or detentions. Article 31, Clause 1, diplomatic agents enjoy immunity from the criminal jurisdictions of the receiving state, and with some exceptions from its civil and administrative jurisdictions. Article 31, Clause 1, A until C, provide that exceptions include real actions relating to private immovable property, actions relating to successions, and actions relating to professional or commercial activities outside official functions. Article 32, immunity may be waived by the sending state. With regard to exemptions and facilities, Article 34 provides that diplomatic agents are exempt from all dues and taxes, except for certain indirect taxes and specific charges. Article 36 provides that they are granted exemptions from customs duties and inspections for personal baggage, with some exceptions. With regards to communications and movement, Article 26 provides the receiving state must ensure freedom of movement and travel for diplomatic agents subject to laws concerning prohibited areas. And also Article 27, the mission is permitted free communications for official purposes and may use diplomatic couriers and messages in court or cipher. The inviolability of diplomatic premises is outlined in Article 22, such as protection of mission premises, the duty to prevent intrusions or damage, and the inviolability of mission archives and documents. The same can be observed for diplomatic agents, which are also inviolable and immune from criminal jurisdictions. There are certain exceptions. However, immunity can be waived by the sending state. Diplomatic agents enjoy various exemptions and facilities, such as under Article 34, exemptions from dues and taxes, and Article 36, custom duties and inspections for personal baggage, with some exceptions. Diplomatic agents must also have freedom of movement subject to certain laws. Missions can also communicate freely using diplomatic couriers and coded messages. Diplomatic agents' functions, however, can end by notifications or terms expiry. The receiving state may declare an agent persona non grata, requiring a recall. During transit through third states, agents enjoy inviolability and other immunities. The obligations of diplomatic agents can be observed under Article 41, Clause 1 of the Conventions. The article provides that diplomatic agents must respect the laws and regulations of the receiving state, while Article 41 also mentions about that they have a duty not to interfere in the internal affairs of the receiving state. Article 41, Clause 3 provides that the mission premises must not be used in any manner incompatible with the functions of the mission. The Vienna Conventions on Diplomatic Relations 1961 is the cornerstone of diplomatic law. This treaty serves as the primary international legal instrument as it governs the establishment of permanent bilateral diplomatic missions, the privileges and immunities granted to diplomatic missions, and the rights and obligations of diplomatic staff. It is to be noted that even states that are not parties to the conventions generally accept it as customary international law. This principle was affirmed in the landmark case of United States diplomatic and consular staff in Tehran, United States versus Iran, uh, ICJ reports number 3. To establish diplomatic relations, both parties must be sovereign states and recognize each other. The conventions defines sending state as the country establishing a diplomatic missions and receiving state as the host country. Article 3.1 of the conventions delineates the primary functions of diplomatic missions, which encompass state representations, protections of national interests, bilateral negotiations, information gathering and reporting, and also promotion of interstate relations. The convention establishes a comprehensive framework for diplomatic immunity, which operates as follows. The first is personal inviolability. Diplomatic agents cannot be arrested or detained. The receiving state must protect them from attack. Their private residences enjoy the same protections as the diplomatic missions. With regard to jurisdictional immunity, complete immunity from criminal jurisdictions, extensive immunity from civil and administrative jurisdictions, with limited exceptions. With regard to legal precedents on waiver, a crucial legal principle established through practice is that diplomatic immunity can only be waived by the sending state. It requires an express waiver, and it is not affected by informal cooperations which establish legal principle. There are exemptions from social security obligations, tax exemptions, and also freedom from personal services. Temporary missions are established for specific purposes. They enjoy similar privileges and immunities as permanent missions. Although they have limited ratifications, they are influential in practice. The Vienna Conventions on Consular Relations 1963 establishes, among others, the legal basis for consular posts, functions of consular officers, specific immunities for consular staff, consular immunities. Consular officers enjoy functional immunity in criminal matters, limited immunity in civil proceedings, protections for official acts. It is essential to note that while these conventions provide the legal framework, their practical application varies between jurisdictions. Therefore, um, we have to understand the local interpretations by following specific procedures of the receiving states, and also to seek legal counsel for that particular jurisdiction. Diplomatic privileges and immunities are essentials to international relations. It provides a foundations for states to engage effectively with one another. Central to these privileges is the Vienna Conventions on Diplomatic Relations 1961, which has been widely adopted for as much as 186 countries. This convention establishes the rules and practices for diplomatic missions, including the rights and responsibilities of states regarding their representatives and diplomatic premises. The conventions is a cornerstone of diplomatic law. It was upheld by International Court of Justice, and it is regarded as binding even for the few non-signatory states. However, interpretations of these conventions may vary across different jurisdictions, and members of diplomatic missions must often familiarize themselves with specific practices and regulations of the host countries. Diplomatic relations between countries, including the establishment of permanent diplomatic missions, are based on mutual consent. According to Article 2 of the Vienna Conventions, these relationships can only exist between sovereign states that formally recognize each other. Diplomatic missions are set up to represent the interests of the sending state, and such missions often facilitate the protections of citizens and engagement in various cooperative activities. The primary functions of the diplomatic missions are outlined in Article 3.1 of the Conventions. This include representing the sending state in the host country, protecting the interests of the sending state and its nationals within the receiving state, negotiating and communicating with the host government, reporting developments in the host country back to the sending state, promoting friendly relations, which may involve cultural, economic, or scientific collaborations. While these functions are not comprehensive, it is also not exhaustive. Missions often take on additional roles, particularly in areas like trade promotions, defense cooperations, and joint efforts against crime, such as drug trafficking and terrorism. Furthermore, the Vienna Conventions on Consular Relations, 1963, supports the dual role of many diplomatic missions in performing consular tasks, such as providing assistance to nationals abroad. Diplomatic missions operate under a set of functions that support both official and goodwill efforts, while also preserving flexibility to adjust to the unique dynamics between the sending and receiving states. It is to be noted that inviolability of premises, as provided under Article 22 of the Conventions, means that agents of the receiving state cannot enter without consent, even in emergencies. The Vienna Conventions on Diplomatic Relations, 1961, establishes the framework for diplomatic missions, privileges, and immunities. It requires mutual consent and recognitions between states. Diplomatic missions protect interests, negotiate, report, and promote relations. Diplomatic immunity includes personal inviolability and jurisdictional immunity. Special missions and consular relations are also covered. The establishment of diplomatic relations requires the consent of both states involved. This consent must be expressed through a formal agreement, such as a treaty or exchange of diplomatic notes. Additionally, both states must recognize each other as sovereign entities. This mutual recognition is essential for the legitimacy and effectiveness of diplomatic relations. The convention emphasizes that diplomatic immunity can only be waived by the sending state. This waiver must be expressed and cannot be implied from informal cooperations or voluntary participations in legal proceedings. This principle ensures that the sending state retains control over the immunity of its diplomats and prevents the receiving state from using legal proceedings to pressure or intimidate them. Diplomatic agents and their families enjoy various other privileges and immunities, which include exemptions from social security obligations. This means that they are not required to contribute to social security systems in the receiving state. And also tax exemptions. This include exemptions from income tax, property tax, and other kind of taxes. And freedom from personal services. This means that they are not required to perform military service or jury duty in the receiving state. Diplomatic privileges and immunities, as contained in international diplomatic law, is complex and dynamic area of international law. The Vienna Convention provide a foundational framework. However, the interpretations and applications are constantly evolving in response to changing global circumstances. Therefore, legal practice practitioners, diplomats, and policymakers have to stay abreast of these developments and ensure that the principle of diplomatic law are being applied fairly and effectively.